All right, put mine right in the back there, please.
These people are hunting for pirates. Not the kind that hijack oil tankers these days, more along the lines of Jack Sparrow or Long John Silver, the kind that existed in the 17th century. And here's the really odd part. This expedition isn't taking place in the Caribbean. It's taking place on Conception Bay in Newfoundland. These ambitious, some might say eccentric, explorers are part of a group called Ocean Quest Adventures.
All right.
They're not looking for gold or doubloons. They're just looking for part of a wreck, a little piece of Newfoundland's 400-year-old pirate history. For hundreds of years, some of the most notorious pirates the world has ever known plied these waters. They even wrote songs about them.
Great God, cried our captain, what shall we do now? Here comes a full pirate to rob us, I know. Oh, no.
And yet, oddly, these pirates are virtually unknown outside the Rock.
We will shake out the reefy boys, and from him it'll go.
If you mention the name of Newfoundland's most famous buccaneer, Peter Easton, in Toronto or Vancouver, you're likely to get a blank stare. But if you mention that name around Conception Bay, you'll get a very different reaction.
Is that the best you got?
Especially in the small town of Harbour Grace, a fishing village where piracy is part of their heritage. You see, Harbour Grace was once the home base for Peter Easton.
How do you think you kissed the gunner's daughter?
A fact this town celebrates annually. Around Conception Bay, tales of Peter Easton have now joined the mythological ranks of Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny. It's just a great celebration.
We have taken control of the town of Harbour Grace and taken your mayor here prisoner.
But underneath all this fun, there is a grain of historical fact. At least according to author Jason Crummy. He wrote a book called Pirates of Newfoundland.
These people, when they were alive, were lionized. Lionized like Elvis is lionized now, or a popular pop band.
And he says they make better-known buccaneers like Blackbeard and Captain Kidd look like amateurs.
Everybody knew who Peter Easton was.
He's the rock star of the day.
He insisted on being called the Pirate Admiral, and he refused the title Pirate King. But he was the Pirate King.
From his safe haven in Newfoundland, Easton, a former British naval officer who turned pirate, preyed mercilessly on Dutch, Spanish, and French shipping.
Harbour Grace was like a biker bunker for pirates. It had a fortress, it had a palisade, it had batteries of cannons, it had taverns, it had bars, it had a still. They had a wonderful time when they were there.
Eventually, the French had had enough. They sent a fleet of warships into Conception Bay to dig Easton out of his lair. When the fleet arrived,
Ready, hands up! Fire!
in true Errol Flynn style, Easton sailed out to meet them.
Ugly, ugly fighting.
Brass forged boarding axes, shotguns that held nails and glass. Right up close. You get right up close and stab them like that.
Easton drove the flagship of the French fleet, the St. Malo, onto a reef at the mouth of this bay. A spectacular victory, but not his last.
What was the most successful escapade he was ever involved in?
He captured 3 Spanish treasure ships off the Strait of Gibraltar in about 1615. It was the largest pirate heist in world history at that time.
Is there a way to say what that would be the equivalent of these days in terms of cash value?
$50 million, right?
An impressive haul, an impressive career for a pirate. But is it all true? You see, a lot of what's told about Peter Easton is mired in folklore. Take the case of this supposed pirate graveyard.
So it's conceivable then.
According to stories in Harbour Grace, this tombstone is a grave belonging to one of Easton's men. But it's not.
The black standard that we call a pirate flag came in existence about 1700, which is almost 100 years after Peter Easton.
In fact, the skull and crossbones are part of a series of carvings. In this case, they represent death, not piracy.
What you think is a real pirate?
But there is a real pirate grave in Harbor Grace. Its location just isn't known by most people. Several years ago, the United Church was digging a new sewer line. They unearthed a mass grave.
And they are correct for the date. They're correct for what they're wearing.
And they've got injuries that would be consistent with having been part of a battle.
Yes.
The site is also within a few meters of where Easton had his fort. It all adds up. But local folklore still prefers that skull and crossbones.
History is what happened, and folklore is what people think happened. If you go around speaking to people about folklore and what they think happened, that's a history too, but it's a people's history.
So to definitively separate historical fact about Easton from what Crummy calls a people's history, we've come across Conception Bay to the site of the first English colony in Canada, Cupid's, founded in 1610.
I'm pretty sure this wall was built in 1612 in response to the threat that was posed by Peter Easton.
Archaeologist Bill Gilbert is an expert in 17th century Newfoundland. He's excavating the remains of that colony, and he knows a fair bit about Easton.
The pirates who came here didn't come looking for treasure. They came looking for supplies, they came looking for ships, they came looking for men. Pirates like Easton came here to rebuild their fleets.
When it comes to Easton,
he arrived here in Newfoundland in the spring of 1612. He arrived first at Harbor Grace. He came here to build up his pirate fleet. He spent the summer here. By the time he left, he had 8 ships and 500 men.
And what about the Spanish gold ships Easton captured? Well, according to Gilbert, he did end his sea-roving days with a flourish.
He sailed to the Azores. He attacked the Spanish silver fleet. He succeeded in capturing several vessels, and he retired to the south of France, a rich man.
So the pirate admiral Peter Easton is as real as these ruins, and he was spectacularly successful any way you look at it. He lived out his days a wealthy, happy man, a claim few pirates can make.
Peter Easton's the greatest living pirate of his time. If he was a businessman, he would be like Warren Buffett. And if he was a criminal, he would be like people from the Great Train Robbery. All right? He was a truly great man.
Our captain being up me boys, he answered him so.
And Easton may have left more than a lasting impression on this province. He may have left parts of his fleet. He did lose ships in the area, and few have ever looked for them. So perhaps now the expedition by Ocean Quest isn't quite as eccentric as it first seemed. With a little luck, a little skill, and a lot of diligence, they just might be able to find the wreck of a pirate ship.
I got more room to maneuver.
A history of pirates that goes back 400 years, a history as yet unexplored, at least the part that's sitting on the bottom of Conception Bay. But that's all going to change. Today, the hunt for the wreck of a pirate ship begins. Bill Flaherty is the expedition's skipper.
You have to do it. If you have a passion for something, you're going to do it. Just like Don Quixote with his windmills. If you believe in it, it's going to be there.
So where to start? Well, there isn't much to go on. But remember that battle that Peter Easton won against the French? According to the historical records, he sank that ship on these rocks.
Now, hopefully today we're going to do a little bit of a side scan sonar and pick up some evidence.
Archaeologist Andrew Hiscock and dive master Rick Stanley decide to run a magnetometer through a search pattern. It will pick up signals from large metal objects.
Keep her forward, but just idle.
If there are any cannons, they should show up. And cannons mean shipwrecks that could be related to Easton.
If I had a hook on the other end of this down, I could almost go jigging while I was here. We're good. Bring it up!
But after a couple of hours, no luck with the magnetometer.
The signal strength is all over the place here, so
the crew decides to deploy a side-scan sonar to see if they have better luck.
Let me know when you want the fish in the water, Andrew.
Yep.
It's a device that sends out a sonar pulse and creates an almost 3D image of the sea floor.
What would you look for if you were looking for like a 17th century cannon? Here, we're more interested in, say, a ballast pile, maybe some timber sticking up.
But the terrain around Easton's Rock also defeats the side-scan sonar. Technology alone is not going to find the wreck of a pirate ship.
Do you think a more likely chance might be to put some divers in the water? You'd have to investigate all these nooks and crannies we're seeing on the side scan.
Searching for cannons in these conditions is like crawling around an area the size of a football field, partly blindfolded, looking for something that might be no bigger than a short length of drain pipe. But divers have one great advantage. They can get into every nook and cranny. For one exciting moment, diver Deb Stanley thinks she sees the keel of a ship. But it turns out to be an optical illusion. After a day of searching, the divers come up empty-handed.
I could see what we were seeing on the side scan, these cracks, eh? There was one even shaped like a bow of a ship.
Disappointed, the Ocean Quest crew head for port.
You're going to pan through an awful lot of mud to find that tiny little grain of gold.
That's right, and that's the payoff. After all that time you spend, all that research, all that, talking to people and going out there and the weather conditions, the sea conditions, everything plays into that whole adventure of the search.
The thrill of the chase.
Right, exactly.
Day 2 of the search. It starts full of promise. Bill has found a local diver who says he might be able to help. Greg Harvey tells the team he knows an underwater location where there might be swivel guns, small guns mounted on ships to repel boarders.
Meet Greg. Greg?
Yeah,
the guy's going to show us a swivel gun?
Well, it could be swivel guns or it could be sewer pipes.
Well, come and show me your sewer pipes.
The thing, just knowing, in your mind, knowing that that could be the swivel gun from the 17th century, being that close to something from history, to me, that's the thrill of, or that's the excitement. That's the adrenaline of diving or research.
Greg also knows about an anchor that could have come from the 17th century and an almost intact amphora, small clay jugs used to store oil and wine. The divers go right into the water. It doesn't take more than a few minutes, despite the poor visibility, to find the anchor. It's so heavily encrusted, it's barely recognizable. And 20 minutes later, they find the amphora jug. Again, these were used by sailors from that period, so it's possible the jug came from a pirate ship. But despite searching until they're frozen from the cold water and almost out of air,
we found the amphora, and we found the anchor. No swivel guns.
So after 2 days of searching, all they found is an anchor and an amphora jug that might date to the 17th century. And now time is becoming a factor. This is a volunteer expedition. People have jobs to get back to. They need some help. Bill remembers that 25 years ago, other people explored these waters.
Is a sample town.
Jeanette Gins was the president of Newfoundland's Marine Archaeology Society.
Here we have 2 clay pipes. Everybody would smoke a pipe, throw it over the end of the wharf when the stem has become too short.
Jeanette's group spent virtually every weekend investigating wreck sites around Newfoundland, and they were quite successful, discovering several significant shipwrecks over the years.
It's putting together a great big jigsaw puzzle.
Somebody referred to it as almost underwater CSI. Did that spark something with you?
It's a cold case. and this is a matter that you have to get the evidence to show it as well as you can.
And sometimes the evidence is 400 years old.
Yes.
Jeanette's last dive with the Marine Archaeology Society was in the late 80s. The government stopped issuing permits, but Jeanette hasn't forgotten the sites she explored.
Hi
The final day of the expedition, and Rick Stanley convinces Jeanette and the rest of her team, David Roberts and Greg Harvey, to reunite for one last dive, to take the expedition to a site near Port Kerwin that may contain the wreck of a pirate ship.
We did find 7 guns. 3 of those guns were 7.5 to 8 feet long, and there were and a couple of smaller ones.
Heavy armament for a fishing boat or supply vessel.
So, bottom line, that could be a pirate from the 17th century.
It could certainly be.
So could this ship be part of Easton's pirate fleet? Hopes run high, but it's been 25 years since they found the wreck. They're not certain they can find it again. As soon as the divers submerge, they realize they're in for a tough search. The visibility is under 10 feet, and they've got to go deep to find this wreck. Thick seaweed covers the ground. After several passes, they find nothing.
Right when you guys are. Okay, go over close.
But the group refuses to give up. They decide on a second dive. This time, David Roberts leads the team to the bottom. And suddenly, out of the murk, appears the encrusted shape of an old muzzle-loading cannon. Then another, and another, scattered across the bottom like discarded toys. The guns are from the right time period. They're different sizes. Pirates picked up guns anywhere they could get them, and this vessel was heavily armed. All evidence to suggest this is probably the wreck of a pirate ship.
All right.
Found 4 of the 5 cannons.
Great. All on one go. Yeah.
Yeah, your directions were spot on, dear.
Have
a look at it.
Okay, so these are some
I'm
of the
trying to
red
work
ones
out
here.
where you were.
But this wreck only raises more questions for Bill Flaherty. Where did the ship come from? Was it part of the fleet commanded by the pirate Peter Easton? And how did it sink?
You have to have that passion of the big picture. You know, not just picking up something, oh, I found a cannon or whatever. It's the association of that with everything around it. There's so much history here, untouched. So many people unaware of what's here in the doorstep.
And what's on Canada's doorstep is an underwater history of pirates that's unknown and possibly underappreciated. A fact that Bill and the other divers plan to change. They're not stopping until they've cleared up all the mysteries about the Pirate Admiral of Newfoundland.